Hey everybody, my name is Sean Pitcher. I'm your host of Roots Podcast. Today we have on Garrett Appier. Garrett is currently a high school track and field coach. Previously worked in the collegiate realm, and then also has a very decorated background. He was a professional thrower, previously training at the U.S. Training Center. He was a three-time national shot put champion. He was also a two-time finalist in USA Championships as well. One of the big reasons why I want to bring on Garrett is one, we have a relationship when we were together at Pittsburgh State. So I know him very well from there. But two, he's going to be able to give us a perspective, not only from previously being an athlete and how it was from that realm, but also now he's on the other side of things when it comes to coaching. So he can give us both perspectives of both of those kind of different realms where he could talk about when he was an athlete previously and then now what it takes out to be a coach and how his being an athlete growing up and going into college and being at the level that he got to is making a difference now when it's transitioning that to the athletes that he works with. But Garrett, really appreciate you having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the hell of an introduction.
So I usually always start out with, give me the roots behind who you are. But I think through our conversation, the viewers are going to very quickly find out who you are as a person by some of the top topics that we're going to discuss today. So the one thing I wanted to start out with today is, from your background, you grew up in a household where your father was a professional athlete, right? He was a baseball player. So could we kind of start there and just give us some insight on how is it having a father that was a pro athlete and being able to have that kind of influence on you, and especially in your area where you were an athlete too.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely showed a different level of dedication to any craft really. I mean, he was watching videos, he was training all night. He would, come home, eat dinner, be back at practice at 5 a.m. I didn't get to see him a lot because he traveled across the country. And I think, it was normal for me because I grew up kind of around him doing that. But when I got to, doing sports for the first time, I realized just how different his dedication was to most people and what it takes to be a professional. And just having that as an example kind of, showed me like, well, if you're going to do something, you better do it right. And the way to do it right has already been shown to you. So you need to follow that. And unfortunately, it took a long time for me to have the what's called the development to to be able to adhere to that kind of standard. But I always knew where the standard was, and I feel like that gave me a big advantage. Like if I ever didn't do well at I played football a lot when I was younger, or even track when I was started doing that. Like I kind of knew when I wasn't working hard enough to be upset, which is probably not something you hear very often now, but I didn't like to blame other people. I always felt like I knew how hard I needed to train if I wanted to be good, and it was more of just getting myself to do it. And then when I got older, I learned about, the nutrition side of things and the weight room side of things, because I wasn't actually in the weight room with my dad. I just knew the effort he put in, but I didn't know everything. So as I got older, the knowledge just kind of developed, and it was cool to get to talk to him about that stuff as I got older. And that was obviously a huge benefit.
Do you feel like, because was your dad, was he Hall of Famer? Am I correct there?
Hall of Fame for the Royals. He missed the Major League Hall of Fame by one vote, unfortunately.
Oh man, that
Uh, that was bad.
hurts. Do you feel like you're having a, obviously like you said there was a standard there. Do you feel like you were always having to live up to his standard, or like you weren't able to get to that standard, or did you find as you kind of grew over time as being an athlete that you had to basically separate that self and just say like he may be up here and I may never get up to here, and I just have to have my own standard for myself. I know I'm going to have to work really hard based off the examples and what he's put in front of me, but like we're never going to be exactly one and the same.
Yeah, I mean he was really good about not. He never really wanted me to play baseball. For one, he was always afraid that I was going to be compared to him forever. So when I started doing like football and track, he was super excited because he was like, that's your own, sphere of influence. But I also didn't have that much pressure because he was, like I said, he was gone a lot of the time, so he wasn't at a lot of stuff. But it was kind of hard to call him and be like, yeah, we lost or I sucked, you know.
Because he was just so
Um,
busy all the time.
yeah, and so I would say it wasn't so much the pressure. I basically had to learn how to follow those standards on my own, kind of without him because he just wasn't there.
Mhm.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, just having the example, like most people, I talk about, especially when I'm coaching, like going to failure, for example, like going to true failure. I knew what that was from watching him do it. Like I'd seen him, train or something before, and I'd seen him get so tired that he was like crawling, like just nothing left, man. Going home, eating a huge meal, and then passing out on the couch, like just complete exhaustion from training as hard as he could. And most people will never get to see that. They don't know that that's where failure really is, and it's hard to find it, until you get there yourself. And it really took until college till I even understood it. I mean, I knew the example, but I'd never gotten there until I got to, I'd say, my sophomore year at college was really the first time I'd ever pushed myself to that point. And if you'll notice in my performance from like sophomore, junior year to senior year, there was a massive improvement, and that's why, because I learned what it was like to train to failure, and just matured from there.
And I think a couple points in there is one, you see with a lot of athletes, children, they try to push them in the same manner or like want them to be, at the same level they are. So I think it was really good on his part where he gave you a lot of the tools, he gave you a lot of good examples, but he essentially let you take your own path in the direction that you were going to go and wasn't forcing or pushing you to the point where then it made you not like doing your sport. Because I think a lot of times we see that with athletes where they'll have these parents that were in these professional levels or high levels and they want their son or daughter to be, just as good as they were or even better if they could. But sometimes it gets to the point where now you're doing that in, adolescents, teens, or maybe early 20s, and now the kid is burnt out because they're just like, I can't do it anymore.
That is a hard line to walk because, I will tell you, I you know I responded in a kind of a weird way. When I wasn't being pushed, I kind of like to push myself. And in fact, I hated when people would come down and hammer on me and stuff, even though I needed it. It would almost push me away, make me want to try less. And so I do see that with a lot of kids now. And in fact, it's it's disturbing how often I see that now in other kids is that you push them real hard to do stuff, they kind of just shy away from it. And I think a lot of that has just come from the way that that I guess we teach kids nowadays. We're not nearly as strict as when I was growing up. Man, people were still getting whooped in the classroom. So we went from that to where we are now. And I'm not condoning that by any means, but I'm just saying there's a different level. Kids haven't been pushed to that discomfort as much, and I feel like the biggest development for me, particularly when I went on the coaching side of things, was how do I get these kids to push past their limits without making them want to quit,
Right.
and without getting on them so hard, like just like I used to hate it when people would get on me. Like, how do I motivate them to push past their limits and themselves? Because that's really the best way. That's what helped me is I wanted to succeed because I knew where the bar was and I wanted to win. How do you get these kids to want to do that without making them want to quit? And that's a tough line, especially nowadays.
So what's maybe some strategies in that sense that you've utilized? Just because nowadays, I mean, you even see a lot of the college sports. Like if you look at college football, right, with the transfer portal,
Yeah.
some kid doesn't like where he's at. Oh, I'm just going to transfer out and go somewhere else. So it's almost like we're fostering this environment where we're allowing kids like if it's too tough, then oh well, you have a way out. You can go somewhere else. It is what it is. Or I'll pick something different. It's not a big deal. And if this person's a jerk to me, then I'll just transfer out somewhere else. But it's like then you're really not building any continuity because you're constantly going from place to place to place, and then you're really never facing the problem that's at hand, which is the challenge or the difficulty that's coming at you. And it's like if you're going to go to the pros, right? You've been a pro. if you can't deal with those challenging times where there's because I always tell a lot of athletes I work with, right, is progress never looks like this, right? It's not just a
Oh,
straight line. It's you're going up, you might have a decline, you might go up again, you might have a decline. It's up and down. So if you can't deal with the downs and you only get excited and happy when you're at the highs, then you're going to have a real struggle getting to where you want to be from point A to point B.
yeah. I mean, I would say that was my biggest mistake in college is I went straight from the pros, and I even was still training professionally while I was coaching the first 2 years, which was unbelievably difficult. And I wouldn't recommend that for anyone if you're listening who is a professional athlete and a coach at the same time. I wouldn't do it. I just did it because I had an opportunity to come back near where I was from and still get to train. So that was kind of the main catalyst for me doing that. But yeah, it's tough because really, what I did is I started, and when I first went to, I'm sorry, a lot of blabbering here, but trying to line the
You're
thoughts up.
you're fine.
Um, so when I left the professional ranks and went to coach, or even when I was still training, the reality is they don't move the meet day for you. So like if you're sick, if you don't feel good, you stayed up all night, none of that stuff matters because you still have to meet tomorrow and you have to perform. And when you're a professional, like your livelihood depends on you performing, and there is no excuse. Like you could have the best excuse in the world, it could be totally true, like and everyone else might have sympathy for you, but the meet doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the results don't. The results page is going to be the same no matter what. And then all people are going to see, I hate to say it, when they look at the results, is the results. And when I got to college coaching, I was just a little too. I think I was a little too like, this is the way of the world, and we got to get up to that. And honestly, the longer that I was there, I spent about 3 years college coaching. The more I was able to kind of funnel that in, especially with my younger athletes that had just came in, because I realized that even at the high school level, they'd really never been told this, you know.
Yep.
And so it was like, how do I bring that back to where instead of being like, this is the way of the world, this is how you have to do it, more like pushing them harder in the weight room, pushing them hard, like a little harder at practice, and slowly over time building that, I don't want to say that character, that character to be able to do it no matter what. And I'd have athletes that didn't sleep or, stayed up all night studying or whatever like that. And I'd be like, okay, I sympathize with you. Should definitely go get some breakfast, come back and let's do some training. But like you can't just miss the training. Like we got to get it. So just building some toughness in that regard. And I had sympathy. I mean, I had those nights in college where I'd stayed up all night studying, or I wasn't feeling good, or I was doing dumb stuff, and I kind of didn't feel like the next day.
And everybody,
But
I can tell you exactly because
yeah,
small side story here. So when we were at Pittsburgh State, I got to the point where I was getting towards the end of my GA position, and my lease was running out from my apartment. And I was like, well, I'm not going to stay here beyond this point. I'm not going to sign another year because I was going to move on to the next position that I was going to go to. So luckily enough, Garrett allowed me to stay with him for, I don't know, was it 2-3 months or something like that?
yeah, it
Um,
was solid couple months.
yeah. So he had a house that was literally a block away from where my apartment was, and he was generous enough to let me stay there, for this last couple of months, so that way I didn't have to pay for a whole year's contract. But I was able to see Garrett's patterns and habits on a daily basis.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, you can remember the times where, he'd sleep into like 11, 12 o'clock. He's getting up and that was his breakfast. And, that's just at the time how you function. And, myself and him had a very long conversation, about a week or so back. And, what I was telling you before, I was like, just to see your transformation from when I first met you in like 2016 to kind of where you are now and kind of how you handle business, whether it was as a pro athlete or as a coach, is like a night and day difference from there to now. But again, like you said, and I say this to a lot of my athletes, a lot of coaches, right? It just takes every athlete a different time to flip that switch when they're going to start making some of those changes. And even if you have all the best coaches around you in the world, if you internally can't flip the switch to know you have to do X, Y, and Z because you have to, and it's not because it's the funnest thing to do, it's going to get you that next level. And it's what has to be done. So kudos to you for eventually shifting towards that. But I've seen you when you've been at those lows and highs, and I'm sure
Yeah.
you could be
Well,
afraid of that too.
what's sad about that is that was actually the best that I was in 2016 is when I went on that run where I broke the national record and all that stuff. And the only reason why that was, that kind of came to be was I'd been training super hard for a couple of years by then, but in particularly that year, I went to bed at a similar time every night and I got up at a similar time. I'm not saying it was normal times for most people, but I was in bed by 2. And in my family, we used to eat dinner. My dad would come back from training super late and he'd take a nap, after he got back because he's just dead tired, right? He'd wake up to eat dinner. So when I was in high school, I'm going down to eat dinner with him. And it's 11, 12 o'clock at night. And it's just because he just woken up from that, initial sleep. I mean, he'd come back from training so tired that I'm surprised he made the drive home. Like he was just exhausted. So, we'd eat dinner super late. And unfortunately, that kind of just stayed with me, all the way through, even that senior year. And,
well, in that case, that was your pattern, right?
yeah,
One,
that was
you probably wanted to see dad when you woke up because you haven't seen him all day. And then 2, like that's what you were consistently doing. So then that just
Yeah,
continue
and that
over.
that really became my circadian. I was always a night owl to begin with, but that kind of cemented my circadian rhythm pattern of kind of like that's when you're gonna like be up till that's when you're gonna go to bed around 2, and so that stayed with me all the way through college. It made college pretty difficult as far as getting the classes on time, but I made it through magically. I got a master's now, so somehow we did it. But somehow we did it. But yeah, so that year the biggest change that I made from the other years, like I'd been training hard, I've been lifting hard, I've been going to practice, and I didn't really let excuses get in the way of me training. So that was my big thing, is I was, even when I messed up or I stayed up too late or whatever, I still made it to practice and I still put in the work. And that's like the baseline of being successful right there. You have to get there and do it. But
Show
then
up. That's the
but
key word.
then
Just show up. Be
yeah.
be at least 5-10 minutes early and get there. If you can do that, that's half the battle.
Oh, it is, and when I was there, I worked my butt off. It was just getting there, so making sure I got there. But that one year from my junior to senior year, I mean, I think I improved 8 feet that year in shot. The honest thing is I went to bed at a similar time, and I got up at a similar time every day. And that alone made me feel better. I had more energy. I was eating better at the time as well. I mean, compared to my previous years, I'm not saying it was amazing. I mean, you can witness it wasn't amazing by any means, but I was eating, at a similar time for breakfast. I was eating at a similar time for lunch. I was eating at a similar time for dinner, and just having that kind of routine and building that in, and that I just perfected that as I got older. And of course, now I have to go to bed by 9:30 and get up by 5 o'clock. It is what it is. Um, but just that takes time, and really it stinks that my career got cut short. I had so many injuries training poorly before I figured out how to train right, which was part of the reason I wanted to become a coach, was to save other athletes from having to go through the learning curve that I had to go through and take all the injuries and stuff before you figured it out. Because I was my strongest and most explosive and fastest the year I retired. But I had a hip injury, and that was kind of it. And your hip's kind of a hard thing to come, hard to get moving again.
Yeah,
So
especially the way you have to move in the ring. Like if there's certain things that aren't up to par, you're not going to be able to transfer the power to be able to vault the shot as far as you want it to go at the end of the day.
exactly, and so that when that happened, that was kind of just the end of it. And I always knew that I could throw, 2150 is kind of what I hit multiple times and fouled it. So I kind of knew I could throw that, and I always wanted to get that one in. But at the end of the day, that started becoming not like, they were throwing 2250, 23. I mean, we're talking the top 2 or 3 guys in the world here that are breaking the world record.
Yeah, I
But
know.
still, those are
That's what I say now. If you're not throwing over like 21, like good luck. You're not going to make
not
it.
you're not throwing over 22. There was 3 or 4 guys at the last championships through 22 in the U.S. alone, which, by the way, would have been the world record like 10 years ago. I mean, 22 to 20, like 23, 15, but the 22 meters is basically unheard of. We'd have like one guy who was doing that every year, and then everyone else would be like 21, 50, 21, and then the last like 6 years after Ryan Krauser and Joe Kovacs and Tom Walsh and all those guys kind of took over. Now they're throwing 22 plus every meet. And now we got, Atunde, who's one of my roommates at the training center. So shout out to him, man. He threw over 22 for the first time. Like that guy deserves it. He was younger than me, so he had a little more. But
So
no,
what would you say is making that change now for throwers to throw so much farther? Is it just because it's there's better training, they're fueling themselves better, like they're better sleep? Like what have you seen has made the biggest difference? Like if no one was barely touching it 5-10 years ago, but now you got guys that are just absolutely just shattering it the last couple of years. Like what's the difference that they're
I
doing
would
now?
say I would say optimization and nutrition and strength training have come a long way. As throwers, we kind of know, once you get to the professional level, especially, like we kind of know what we're supposed to be eating. Thanks to you guys, appreciate it. You guys have kind of shown us the way of what we should be eating. So now it's a lot easier for us to, gain strength and maintain it and just feel better training wise, just based off what we're eating. And then on top of that, just understanding like the circadian rhythm, like, man, you got to sleep, like, you got to get your recovery. I mean, you're losing, 15 to 30% of your testosterone, growth every night if you're not, if you're not going to sleep. And like, that's a huge chunk of your lift right there. If you're not getting the most out of it, and especially at the professional level, man, you gotta get everything you got.
You
So
gotta you gotta take advantage of every little piece that you can. And I mean
15 to 30%.
some of these athletes don't understand, like you need 8 to 10 hours. And it's like as soon as you start getting under 8 hours and you do that consecutive days in a row, like it's not really a shock. You feel the way that you feel. Like
Oh, no.
and what I tell a lot of athletes too, it's your day is going to be determined based off of what you do the night before. And I've assessed, hundreds of thousands of athletes, right? And it becomes the same pattern over and over. Like you go to bed late, if you wake up too late, it's going to affect your mood, it's going to affect your appetite, it's going to affect whether you're going to eat breakfast or not. It's going to affect basically your whole fueling routine and what you do the entire day. And like maybe you feel a little terrible in the morning, you feel better in the afternoon, but realistically, like you're probably not going to be at 100%. So if you have 5 to 7 days in a row and you're really only feeling 60, 70%, but then you got to be a professional athlete and give 100%. Well, now you're missing out on 20, 30% every single day. So
Yeah,
and that adds
like
up day after day, month after month. And it's like sometimes until you put it into that big picture, and I've had to literally write it out on a board and show people, then they're like, oh, like I didn't get that or I don't understand that until you showed me that.
yeah, and like I mean, I know we're taking the extreme at 30%. Let's just say you're losing 30%, right? I mean, 30% of your lift over the course of 5 days. I mean, we're 120%. At least if you're lifting 4 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least I lift 4 days out of 5, so that's where I'm going off of. But yeah, about 120% of your lift has just disappeared over the course of a week, and that's not good. And so I'm not saying you're not gaining something, but it's like you could be gaining more. And then also the recovery factor, the reducing risk of injury of just sleeping enough is unbelievably, like there's so much evidence to back that up that you just need to go to bed. And that'll dramatically reduce your risk of injury, which was my biggest thing: lower back, hip, shoulder, I had all kinds of stuff. Which when you're throwing a 16-pound metal ball for as long as you are, I mean that tends to happen. But
And repetitively.
yeah, I mean, I've thrown, I don't know what they say makes you a master, but I've thrown well over 10,000 throws. So I have a pretty good idea of what's going on in that realm. And yeah, and then the last thing was just strength. Like, like even Krauser especially is kind of famous. I got to live and train with him for a year, but he has a family book. Like a lot of his family members were throwers. And it's a book like where it's thick, like, and it looks like an old school book too. It looks like almost like like a witch's spell book or something like that. A whole bunch of papers tattered together and stuff. And yeah, I mean, that has a lot of knowledge in it. And then obviously, like, the fact that we're, creating hybrid formulas now for lifting. I mean, I know that the lifting that I did at the training center that I was a huge fan of was a RPE tonnage system hybrid, which is just a hybrid between those two systems. And, back in the day, a lot of they were making those systems, and now they're developed. Now we're like combining them to try to make them more efficient. And I feel like it's just made with the nutrition education, like people are eating better, the sleeping education, like we know we're supposed to be going to sleep, even if we don't always pull it off. Like we understand like the importance of it, which I feel like maybe people in the past just didn't understand that. Also, yeah, just the strength training, like we have those strength trainings like on par. Like we know how to rest people properly, we know how to prevent overtraining, we know how to get you just absolutely unbelievably strong in whatever time you're lifting, and we just understand periodization and cycling a lot better than we used to. And so you
I
put all
think
this together
a
and
key thing there is, you kept saying we know. And the tough thing is we have all these professionals and support staff to help the athlete and they know what's best for them, but it comes down to the athlete to want to accept the help. And that always tends to be the biggest challenge. And, maybe it's nutrition and like I'm the dietitian and like they don't want to listen to me, but maybe that strength coach brother has a better relationship and like I can pass messages through the other individual to get to you because you respect that person better than me. So it's like that's always a tough thing. We have all this research and we can translate it into simple forms, but it's just like the athlete ultimately has to want to make the decision like, okay, here it is. What are you going to do with it? That's the tough part.
well, and that was the coolest thing I think about doing the high school coaching that I'm doing now is in this world, it's just developing. Like I saw in college
Thanks.
what was not being developed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like in college, I was getting the kids and like their high school coaches, more power to those coaches. I'm sure they were doing the best they could, but the kids just weren't really like, they weren't able to handle a lot of like load training wise. They weren't able to, they weren't, I'm not going to say that they weren't like physically in, like or mentally they were into it. Like they wanted to train hard, but they just had never been pushed to the level that they needed to be pushed to in order to be successful at college. And so when I started coaching high school, it was awesome to kind of get to start from the very base. Like in college, you're kind of expecting people to be at a certain spot and you kind of need to
But
get
they're
them going.
not sometimes.
No, but they're not. Well, the problem is you really need to get them going quickly because like your first college meet, is in, a couple months.
Mhm.
Like once you get to college, I mean, you're competing against other college people and you're going to get absolutely smashed if we don't get this stuff in so quickly. And that's hard, and a lot of kids will want to quit and stuff, and that's rough. But at least like when I'm doing high school, I can really start with like freshmen and slowly build their character, build their workload, and just slowly be able to show them the way, kind of the way that I wish I could have been able to do it at college. And I think I've grown a lot too from coaching high school as well. It's like how to do that better.
It,
And if I ever go back to college ranks, that's some knowledge I'll definitely take with me, is how to take someone who really hasn't been developed, and develop them really from start to finish, without making them want to quit, because out of all my kids, I think I had, I was coaching offensive, defensive line just recently, and I think I had 30 or so freshmen, and not one of them quit.
yeah,
So,
I mean, it's a humbling experience working with the 14 to 18-year-old age group,
yes.
because they come from all different backgrounds, they come from all different environments, and that was the question I was going to ask, kind of based off of that, is like, why are you seeing a lot of these athletes not prepared coming into college? Is it just because the environment or the coaches that we have now don't have the tools and education and aren't set up for success, so they can't translate that over to the athlete? Or are you seeing it from the parent side, where the parents don't have a lot of these general life skills to pass on to the kids, so then now if it's not you, they're probably never going to get it? Like, what are you seeing there?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, man.
It's a mixed bag.
I would say there's a lot of stuff kind of combined there. I grew up in a household with a professional like baseball player. I mean, I knew what hard work was. It just took me a long time to get myself to being able to do that kind of work. A lot of these kids have never even seen that, and I had a great, the head football coach I'm under now has done a terrific job of, he's hard on the kids, but at the same time he's not an asshole.
Well, he
And
probably knows when to push and when to like pull back. Where you have some people that are like both extremes. You got the person that's a jerk 24/7, and you don't know what the difference is. And then you got the people that are way too soft, and then the athletes are just rolling on top of them. It's
yeah,
it's
and
to have that in between and be able to know when to throttle up and throttle down, and when to do that depending on the personality of the athlete isn't easy.
well, and unfortunately, I would say it's almost, I don't want people to get too mad at me for saying this, but I would say it's almost easier at the high school level to keep athletes going and engaged than at college, because at college they drop out, like they're adults, right? They can drop out, they can transfer, they can, they have options as far as like getting out of the situation they're in. Whereas in high school, it's like you kind of have to go to high school and all your friends are there. So it's almost like there's more motivation to keep the kids going in high school than there even is in college nowadays. Um, and it's rough. And also a lot of colleges have recruiting quotas, and I've had to deal with that. And that's, it's a business too. I mean, so I get that, but at the same time, you know, some kids just simply would rather quit than get better. Like they would rather burn the whole building down than admit that they are not, up to snuff. You know what I mean? And
And
you
that's
know, and
where they just don't want to be seen as weak, or they don't want to be seen as a certain way in front of their friends. And that's where that, I mean, which I'm sure you've seen across the board, the sports psychology, the mental performance, that's becoming a huge factor, and that's being broadcasted amongst lots of different professional athletes across many levels. That
well,
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say that's why it's been so great going to the high school level. It's because in college, like I said, your first meet is in a couple months. I mean, you really got to get going. Like you basically like you're ready to go. Like we got stuff to do. Like keep up or fall back. I mean, because you don't have options in college. Like I can't baby you because you're gonna get smashed in this first meet, and then you're gonna want to quit, and you're gonna be embarrassed.
Mhm.
It's like, so you either better start working hard right away, which is kind of like a punch in those kids' mouths, because it's like, holy crap, like what did I just like join into? And
Yeah, yeah, they went
it's
zero
hard
to
to
100 real fast.
yeah, and it's hard to retain kids that way. And that's where the quota thing becomes kind of an issue, because it's like, yes, we need to try to get the kids who haven't been developed, into being ready to be a college athlete, but at the same time, like their first meets in a couple months.
Yeah.
So like, you don't want them to get beat up so bad that they want to quit like in their first college meet. So it's like, trying to bridge that gap is still very difficult. And many coaches, like even my coach to this day, who has gone down as multiple coach of the year, he has a hard time retaining kids through
Mhm.
that first, like, well, I mean, excuse my cussing, but that first ass whooping, like, that
Yeah.
kids get through that and they want to quit and they don't want no part of it. And or if it's awesome, they'll get their butt whooped and then they'll be like, wow, like I really need to train harder. So it kind of can go both ways, but that first couple months especially is the most vigorous. Usually if a kid makes it through that, then they got a good shot to make it through the rest of college. But I'd say that freshman year is such a turbulent time for any athlete.
It's that fear of failure. They don't want to like they've never had again. If you let's say you're 16 years old and you've never been put in a position where you've ever had a fail, and then now you're failing. It's not that person's fault. You just never been exposed to something like that. And like until you have, it then becomes you have two choices. I either quit because I don't like how this feels, or I don't like how this feels and I'm going to do something about it to get better because I want to redeem myself or I want to help the team or whatever sport specifically it is and come out on the other side where we need to be. And that's, in your head to be able to have that self-talk and tell yourself to make hopefully this decision on the right-hand side, which is do the things that's going to make you be better, isn't always the quickest and easiest thing because you also have then teammates, right, that are, hey, quit with me. Or you have the other teammates that are going to say, like, nah, come in here and work harder with me. So then you almost have that, what I call that herd approach. Some athletes will bring you down with them and some athletes are going to bring you up with them. It's which athletes or which friends do you want to go with?
Well, and that's where captains are so important and having a team around you, making sure. I don't like the team voting captains thing at all. And I strongly advise against that because when you pick a captain, you want somebody that embodies the personality that you want to be on the team. And you need to pick that. Like as a coach, like you need to pick that athlete that embodies commitment and dedication because you want that to be the example that you follow. You don't want to vote someone a captain who isn't responsible, who isn't showing up to practice all the time, who isn't putting in their effort. That's not somebody that you want to be your captain. And so I hate when people do those team voting things because I feel like it's just a good it's a popularity contest instead of
Yeah.
like what do you want to be on the team.
It's like, oh, hey, here's the quarterback. He plays safety. He plays quarterback. He's a 5-star athlete. He's the best kid. But yeah, he always shows up late. Like that's not the example you set because now everyone underneath him who's following the supposed leader is now falling into the same trap and think what he's doing is okay. So then now you just have 50% of the team that does all the same stuff he's doing because he's the top guy or top girl, and they think that's fine. And now you're just creating a terrible culture and an environment that's when you start getting into these hard, challenging games or situations, right? That's the athlete that's probably going to act out and do things that aren't going to help the team, which you end up losing.
Yeah. And sometimes those kids need like a humbling, like they you get you if you make the right person captain, the kids will see who's really more dedicated. Even if that kid is a 5-star athlete, like they're gonna see and they're gonna respect the person that's showing up every day. Even though they don't want to, like they'll be like, well, he or she was here, so I came. And like that's who you need. And then all of a sudden, those 5-star athletes start feeling kind of like pressured a little bit to like, man, maybe I should go to practice. Like, they're working hard without me. And, that's it's all you can do is build a culture and then hope it sticks. And like going back way back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like it's just so nice when I'm coaching high school to not have to worry about like, oh, in 3 months you're gonna get your butt kicked by guys and girls that are 4 years older than you. Like because when you go like freshmen are competing against seniors, like so
Yep.
that's a lot of difference there. Where in high school, it's like, no, freshmen and sophomores are most likely competing against freshmen and sophomores. So let's walk the freshmen through like, what are how can I make your character a little better? How can I make your toughness a little better? How can I slowly work you into being, an animal, like teaching you how to do that. How do you deal with adversity? How do you deal with defeat? And yelling at kids is really never a good answer. The only time that I would ever advise yelling at a kid, and I rephrase this as not like yelling at cussing them out, but like if something's going on and you've worked about it, you've talked about it, and it's just an effort thing. Effort is the only thing that I really view as like something being yelled at because like you can control that. Like you can control your effort.
You
Like
can.
I had kids that would miss a block And it's like, it's all right, man. Like, hey, just move your feet. Like that's it, but they were giving their best. That's the difference, is like knowing when or when not to get on somebody,
Yeah.
because you want to make them tough, but at the same time, like if they did the right thing, you don't want to punish them by you ripping into them. If he was giving his best trying to block this kid, and you can see he was giving his absolute effort and he missed the block, well, that's when you need to work on technique and try to figure out like how can you, put him in a better spot to succeed. But at the same time, if he's out there and he just lets a kid go back and crush your quarterback, yeah, like that's one of those situations where you need to set an example and be like, look, like that is not going to be tolerated. You cannot just give up on a play like that and get your quarterback killed because your brother is now injured.
Yep.
Like,
And guess what? You can't use I'm tired. You can't use all these excuses. It's like everybody on that field right now is tired. Everybody's trying to score a touchdown. But when you will let up that one or two plays, that's the difference where now either he's hurt, he fumbled the ball, he threw an interception. Like, and that's where it's almost like you have to hit on those specific moments at those specific times to be able to get the point across for them to see it. Because otherwise, you can tell them about it multiple times, but it may just not get through. I mean, it's like some of the stuff with nutrition sometimes, right? Like, oh, I'm always feeling exhausted at practice. Okay, well, you didn't eat breakfast before you came in and had practice, or you slept 6 hours last night before you practice. And it's like until you catch them in that exposed state where they're feeling terrible or something didn't go well, it's like then that's where they can put two and two together and then, oh, I got to change this and do this. And like, yep, that made a difference. And now that became a positive that came up.
It's so easy in the weightlifting, especially like when I ran, the strength part of that college program when it came to throwing. And it was so easy because the RPE system really reveals. I mean, that's an effort, almost I don't want to call it an effort-based system, but it kind of is in regards to like every RPE number is a certain amount of effort that it should be. And once you're in the system for a while, you really do understand how it's supposed to feel. And you can tell if a kid comes in and he didn't sleep that night or whatever, because he will get what should have been an 8 RP is now like he's failing. And it's like, dude, this should have been hard, but not like you shouldn't have been anywhere near failure. Like what was going on? And literally I can just walk up and not be like, hey, like, did you go to bed last night? Did you eat? And it's always
No.
yeah. There's always, yeah. And so that's why I love that system so much, is because it's like, I mean, from an athlete perspective, it lets you know how difficult the day is supposed to be. And it also lets you adjust maxes without like having to go to failure, which I think is nice. But it also, as a coach, reveals how your athlete is doing, like in the weight room. Like you learn so much information just by watching them lift. That was really helpful to me as a coach. And yeah, I mean, it's a new world out there. We gotta get used to it. I just remember like my college coach would call me all kinds of names that I can't repeat. Now I'm trying to walk kids through like how to get tougher. It's just a different world out there, but it can be done. It can be done.
Yeah, I mean, watching their body language and how they walk into the room, how they respond to you, like all that's pretty much going to tell you in a couple of seconds, like what type of day it's going to be for them. So then it becomes right, like, do I continue to crush them because I know they're feeling terrible, or let me adjust a little bit because they're coming in this manner, coming in this body language, they didn't sleep, so I may have to tweak and adjust something a little bit, and that's where that separates the really good coaches from the coaches that are just like, I don't care, I'm going to punish them. It's like, punish them for what? Like if you're punishing, how is that going to help them? Like you have to adjust and educate them, and hopefully a better result comes going into the next day that makes them want to change, and then you get more out of them the next day.
I think the easiest thing to do, especially, and it worked as I got older, when I know we don't have that much time right now, but with the college stuff especially, I mean, you have to work the kids into it, and setting clear standards so that they knew what the rules were, and you weren't just punishing them. Like they knew, like, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. So then it was less of a punishment and more of like, oh man, I screwed up. And that's what you want to start building even in high school. You want to be like, these are the standards. You need to be here or whatever. And here's the punishment if you don't. And then it's, instead of it being your fault for punishing them, now it's like, oh, I knew the rule and I messed up anyway. And it's like, okay, well, now you're starting to build accountability and toughness.
Yeah.
Like really, really easily.
All right, guys. So we're gonna cut it off here. We're gonna do a part two because we have a lot more information we want to talk about. So stay tuned. Listen to part two with me and Garrett Appier. That's going to be available very shortly after this episode. So continue to tune in.